doing the internal selection.
Wait, what? Are we on Mill Street? I'm sorry. I think
Riverside.
Okay, all right. I was reading. Yeah, I got it.
You're reading ahead.
Don't read the notes.
Go ahead.
Don't read the middle.
We are in the process of the internal committee selecting from firms. We're using the MDOT master list to make that selection.
Okay, thank you. Because I was gonna say, I know doggone well we were right here, like 3 months ago, waiting on something from MDOT to advertise. And I was like, we still waiting on MDOT?
We decided to work through their master consultant contract selection process.
All right. So what does that put us in terms of a timeline?
Hope to have our scores put together by the end of the week and then send you a letter with the recommendation to you for signature next week. And then we'll send all that to MDOT and then they'll bless it and then we'll start contract negotiations with the highest scoring firm.
All right.
Is that for design that you like to look at?
Okay.
Can I ask a question about Middle Street? The MDOT is paying $3 million for which part is that both? We had a year and a half ago, we had Middle Street North and Middle Street South.
We're going to start with south and we'll start at Capitol and head north.
All right.
And that's what MDOT's paying for. Are they paying 100% of it?
I think so.
How far north?
All I know is
We're going,
check is $3 million.
we're going to fortification.
Yeah, that's all I know. The check is $3 million.
Going to fortification at most. There's a bridge in there too that we've had on our list.
That's why we started down there.
Okay, but does MDOT include, that $3 million includes that $1 million for
Yes.
that bridge that's been
I
passed?
asked, yes.
Okay,
I asked for it.
so, in all our looking at all our budgets, that Ted was talking about a while ago, where he's talking about Mill Street, we don't have any costs involved in Mill Street right now.
Correct.
The good transportation commissioner blessed us last year.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you, D-Call.
Yeah, thank you, Dick Hall.
They have an office down there, don't they?
On West Street.
West Street.
Well, yeah, it goes all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it runs.
they have an operational office or something down there that goes all the way down to the
It's north of Woodrow Wilson, that's
Yeah.
their shop area.
Yeah, the shop area down
It's
there.
pretty nice up
Yeah.
there.
The Third Street project is Mega Evers. The city did do an RFP process. We did make a selection internally to utilize Neil Schaefer, and we're still working on the scope, services, and how that contract's going to be formulated. And Lynch Street, we're still waiting on MDOT activation.
What does that mean?
They've got to close out the first project internally in their books before
Okay.
they can start that second one, have the exact dollars and cents.
All right.
What, it seemed like we've been waiting MDOT to close out that thing for like a year.
They have when you finish construction, they have to go through, audit the project, double check all the material submittals through their central laboratory. It's a little,
That doesn't bother us generally, except because we just wanted to do another project.
with the federal money, yeah.
Otherwise, it would come.
The program manager, which is IMS, the notice to proceed was issued, and they're currently working with the staff right now to push year one projects and develop final year two plan. As it relates to street resurfacing, we did complete the utility cut repair. We did notice to proceed to repay Watkins, Lynch, Forest, and McClure. That was a project that was in conjunction with Hines County.
And to be specific, it was money that the 1% went to as match because Hines County had a grant that it did not have match money for. Just to be clear.
And that was $600,000. We resurfaced Lawson Street, and the city accepted unit prices from APAC for a 9-month resurfacing term bid, which is currently going on now. We, under the urgent need design, we allocated funds for the Main Street Bridge.
What determines urgent need?
I think there was projects that came up that we would consider, I guess, an emergency nature.
Okay.
And of course, you know, we received a report from state aid about the condition of Main Street. So that particular project got moved up. That's where we had some available funding.
So I'm just making sure that the minutes are reflecting that we're not calling some urgent need just randomly, that there's some kind of methodology that's outside of this room, or even if it's inside the room, that is unbiased, that's determining that.
Well, we kind of discussed about maybe not having that in moving forward, just because of that nature.
All right.
You know, if it's a project that needs to be moved up, or you know, in a classification such as an emergency, then we'll just bring it forward.
Yeah, because I think what you'll find out is that, you know, in this room, what we've learned is that everything's urgent to us.
Yeah, depends
And
on
it
where
depends on where we are and how it affects us.
Is the match on that Hines County project, did that come out of urgent need? Where did that come from?
I have to look back, Mr. Perry.
I don't remember us having those streets are matched to Hines County on any other discussion. I might be wrong, but I'm just trying to think.
It may have.
It was early on.
Yeah, early.
And I know it was early on because I probably was in office, I don't know, maybe 2 months, and was having that conversation with Board of Supervisors.
And started that conversation before your election.
Well, I'm sure.
Tillman was acting mayor.
Okay.
So in terms of, again, how we operationalize, looking at the money and how to leverage it best, I mean, is there a mechanism in place, and forgive me for having to ask all these kinds of questions, but is there a mechanism in place by which we're constantly checking with the state and Hines County to figure out how we can potentially move around our projects to maximize the value of what we got here? Is that part of what the project manager internally is doing?
Now, yes. Because part of it, like, you know, we first started this, one of the major problems that you're hearing about a lot is about, for example, Capitol Street, and that being used and saying that the city's sitting on $500,000 to see streets redone. Well, that's not the case. The case is that there have been streets selected by Hines County to get done, but there hadn't been any collaboration with the city to determine what our ADA needs and focus should be. We have a consent decree. And so, to answer your question, when we first started doing all of this, none of that was in consideration. That mechanism was not in place. And so now, the benefit of the program manager is that they do have a dual relationship with both us and the county, and also working with the state.
Is there an opportunity potentially, and you all might be doing this, but is there an opportunity to maybe go to the county and have some type of liaison paid by both, to where we can really leverage the entire pot of money in a more effective way?
Well,
as much
I think,
candy for
honestly,
nickels we
you
can
know,
get.
just being candid, the IMS is being paid by both. They're the county's engineer, and they're this commission's program manager.
Okay.
So I would have the expectation that there's nothing that should be missed going forward, because IMS has their hand on all of the moving around at the county, as well as being the program manager over here.
Have we scoped it as such? I'm just curious.
No, it's not scoped as such, but you know, I think it just makes sense that it would be in their best interest to make sure that all of their interests align. Because they only have a 1-year contract.
we're getting good cooperation out of it.
The-
District 1.
I know. All right.
On those, before we get into urgent needs on the main street, we did talk about that at the April meeting, I think. The notice received from all wards under 1 cent funds. I think later on when we get into this further on down, is that the 6 streets? We never did agree on which streets those would be, but I can see that the council's already approved the contract and y'all given notice to proceed to do it.
Those were, all wards was that when we had the longer discussions on the streets, you had the yellow streets and the blue streets.
That was on the $9 million neighborhood streets. I'm talking about the 6 major streets that were
the
$5
major
million.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Because at the March meeting, and then again at the April meeting, the question I raised, and I know other people did too, but I specifically did, how did we pick these streets? And then we were, well, it was out of these 23, so how did we pick these 23 streets to pick these? At that time, it was 5 streets, and I noticed the contract was 6, and so it just seemed like we skipped past the fact that this commission is supposed to go through there and look at which streets, and it just, I know we had a list that was given to us, but we never said we agreed with that list, but now we've got a contract out there to proceed on doing it and spending these funds.
Now,
Are you talking about the Ridgewood Road, Briarwood Drive, what were the others?
Briarwood,
Raymond,
McRaven, Gallatin, and then we had an ad option for Greenway
I
from
mean,
Walmart.
go find in the minutes where we ever agreed to those. We did go look at the minutes of the meeting, I mean, the tape of it. We talked about them, but we said, and then we've added some and changed some, because Briarwood wasn't on the list and the add-on wasn't on the list. Ridgewood was, Gallatin was, but the question was, well, it's the best out of these 23, and the question was, why did we pick these 23 to pick the best out of? Why didn't we include President Street? Why didn't we include High Street? Why didn't we include West Street on any of those streets to even be considered? And we talked about, I forgot whether you mentioned Pearl and yeah. And so, but now I see that we've issued a contract and given them notice to proceed.
Yeah, well, we did discuss using that CMPD data that was available.
We discussed using it, but we discussed how do we pick which ones out of there to do it on. And we never did sit there and say, yes, this is it. This is what we were told they'd like it to be. But there was some discussion because there were some others that weren't even considered in that list. I mean, there were some streets that weren't even, Pearl Street wasn't even on the list to be, or President Street, or High Street wasn't even on the list. And so how do we say that Ridgewood is worse than High Street, or Briarwood is, I mean, it's easier to drive down Gallatin Street to see how it makes that list.
I think it wasn't, Mr. Perry, it wasn't only the fact that one street was worse than the other. We also took into consideration the traffic volume.
I understand all those things, and that's what I wanted to take into consideration. And this bunch is supposed to take that into consideration. Never got the details and the data on all the streets to be able to get that. And we never made the decision that those would be the ones that we would do. Because we didn't have that. We got that data given to us at the last meeting, which was in April. And from there, we never talked about.
Speak, Josh. We didn't.
You're talking about on the major streets.
On the major streets. On the $9 million for the neighborhood streets, we said everything that's 300 and less.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything that's 300 and less, we're going to do.
And where on the ward,
These streets, right?
there's 5 in Ward 1 or less on the neighborhood research?
I think we'll get to that in a little bit. Listen.
Okay, I'm sorry, I get that.
Yeah. But
I think what probably got misinterpreted was the up to 15.5, but you know, as it relates to the streets, you got a valid argument. So
I mean, I think we agreed with the concept and even voted on the concept of, yeah, let's spend $5 or $6 million and do some major streets.
That's why we
The
had
dollar amount was there.
Yeah.
You're right. We never came back and determined
Which streets.
Yeah, we did some evaluation. I thought there was some, maybe that, unless it was in the package, in May package, probably that we didn't have commission in May.
Well, I don't. What I remember is the argument that Mr. Perry is making right now. How do we decide on these streets? And I remember his request. I don't know. I remember his request for some kind of validation to how we got down to those 6 streets versus the streets that were on the, I remember that. I don't remember us ever saying.
It was a validation of the 6, and then the validation of the 23 that the 6 were picked from.
Right.
Because the 23, you know, why are these 23?
Yeah, and I remember that clearly. I don't remember us saying, well, let's just go on and move on these streets. So you're right.
Start talking about a workshop.
Yep.
Well, and that's when we had the 2 key people on the program, on the project lead.
Yep.
So is that,
I think we can get to it. I think it's
later on.
There's some stuff later on, just like the
Yeah, keep
just like the
rolling.
$9
and we'll
million
get to
is
it.
later on.
Yeah, keep rolling. We'll get to it.
As it relates to equipment, the city's pothole patch machine and back truck order. They're here? Okay, all right. And
Here is in what?
Yes, they came in, they arrived on time, meaning that we've been operating them now a little bit over 2 months.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit over 2 months.
All right.
can you put some balloons on those things, streamers, make sure people see them running around now?
Am I correct that there now, the city has 2 pothole patching machines?
Right.
one very loud one,
Is it?
as it relates to some of the constituents complaining, but it
Well, let
works.
it comply.
It works.
Are they still working, or are they working on the same wards in order as what we're patching here? That I guess we're gonna talk about, where 5 and 1 are left, the city's patching machine.
Yeah, how's that
Where
just
are they?
sent out every day based on what 911 or not 911? 311 call?
Yeah, they pretty much just working on it. We blitzing each ward, so they just taking 1 ward a day, and they just kind of going through each day, doing a different ward a day.
Can I ask please skip the question, don't please ask for permission. I see where they worked up here on High Street, and they patched 2 or 3 big potholes, but all the ones that are just big enough to hold your tire for a little while are just left. I mean, I'm talking about on the block between State Street and President Street. There's a bunch of patches, and then there's some utility patches too, but then there's a bunch of things that aren't patched. How do they decide what to patch and what not to patch with that pothole? Or with the crew, even if it's without a machine, I don't care if it's a machine or not.
Well, it goes back to us having to do a better job as working together, as educating the public as it relates to them putting the request in 311.
I think that's the
Because-
stupidest way in the world for us to do it, because if you want to do it that way, I'll go home and tell our constituents to call 14 times a day to 311. When I tell them that, they say I call and I can't get any response and I can't get through to them. I mean, if the pothole's there and they're working on this one, why aren't they working on the one beside it?
Again, when they report it, one thing is whether it's a pothole, one thing is whether it's a utility cut, and it depends on how it's reported to which crew goes out.
They go out there and they fix some utility cuts, and they came out there and they fixed that pothole that was about this deep and this big right there at the corner. But where the street's just deteriorating, and maybe it's just because it's not a pothole, maybe it's just the street's disappeared. But where it's just all over and there's holes and holes and holes, when they fix that pothole, why don't they fix this other right side? Drive up there after this meeting's over.
So some of that is into being whether or not they have all the material that they need when they get to that spot. And the other part, as Mr. Lee was really saying, is whether or not you actually need resurfacing. So you might have to do mill and overlay if it's that bad, which I've ridden through that area, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And that's some of the case for when you're working with the deterioration that we have. And if you're just fixing potholes, oftentimes you still have to look at that not as a permanent fix.
So,
it's
okay,
really
wait.
what buying you time.
Let me say, okay, and I hear what you're saying, but this has come up before, because what I asked was, how do we prioritize to a certain degree on how we do these potholes? So, for example, what I know is that if there's a 311 report, we're going to go out and take care of that, because for liability's sake, we got to make sure that that reported pothole gets taken care of. But if they're there, why won't we just say, you know what, we're on this stretch of High Street for the next 700, 800 feet, why not let's just do all of these potholes versus just,
So we
Yeah.
have talked about that, and there are cases where, again, if they have the material, we're
Okay.
asking them to do those site inspections and to fix that. Just like we do case by case on a lot of stuff, we have to go back and look at what is that surrounding situation. And so if it's something where you got multiple base failures, well, sure, you could go ahead and patch that for now, but you know, even in a few days with the way that the traffic is and the way that it has just degraded, it's gonna be in a worse situation. So for us, it's a matter of, and we do have those cases where we've gotten some of the crew that's assigned to go back and do resurfacing, that will go back and actually have them to resurface. So some of that is going on as well.
so who's determining that? The guys, the crew that's out there, or is there somebody who's got an eye, who's trained to see that?
It actually should be the supervisor.
Right, the superintendent and supervisors on site to do that, but in a case like that, if there is any other ADA concerns, if we were to basically pave or patch that whole entire intersection or area of that degree, that could raise some other concerns. So what we have to do is be very aware of the surroundings, what's going on there. So if there are ADA concerns there, and if we send that paving machine out there and pave that whole area, because you have that instance, like you say, where you may have some smaller potholes and bigger potholes, and in most cases, it just makes sense to basically just pave the whole thing. But we have to
Or not pave the whole thing.
Right.
I don't want you to have an ADA problem. I just want you to put the stuff in the hole, and not just the hole that somebody reported.
Right.
But if it's 3 holes, because typically the hole that got reported is the one that burst the tire. And so you'll feel that one, and then there's one 10 inches away from it, but it doesn't get filled. And I hear you saying that probably because of the amount of material that they have.
Well, then
So
why don't they go back and get some more material and come back and fix that?
It's oftentimes not as easy as it sounds.
I understand,
Especially
but
for us
let
to
me-
look at- but let me just say this, and we'll be clear about it. I mean, that's something that we're working towards to make sure that we do going forward.
Let me, you say it depends on if the whole street needs to be done and there's traffic count because of all that traffic up down. But those streets aren't on the other list to even be looked at about being repaved. I can talk about it over on Graymont, where at the corner of Graymont and Poplar, in that intersection, there's no street there left. They came in there and paved a couple of potholes, but I can't get any street in Bellhaven put on either one of the lists to even be looked at. And so they're not gonna go in there and fix the street either, so at least put some damn asphalt in the hole. If they're not gonna go in there and put it on the list of major streets or the list of minor streets to be looked at. Because, I mean, it just means it's just gonna deteriorate and go to nothing. I agree with you, Mayor. I think if he's there, figure out some way to go ahead and fix the hole that's a foot. I don't even know how you know which one the 311 call's made on sometimes. How do you know it was that hole rather than that hole?
Don't they have to read the grass?
Right.
When they're about 2 feet apart, how do you tell the difference?
I know we're gonna get to it in a minute, but on the pothole paving or intersect paving, not the neighborhood resurfacing, but the 3 to 5 million, I think it is. I mean, on that, I recall seeing the list, and it lists the street, but it doesn't list a specific location. Obviously, there's lots of streets that have intersection markers. It sounds like that might be a situation where you're talking about where a pothole patch needs more than just filling in, and maybe something bigger. Is that where those would be addressed in that paving plan? I mean, $3 to $5 million is a lot of money.
Well, I think that goes back to what you would classify as maintenance and what you would actually classify as actually a street resurfacing job. For instance, I went out to Tyrone Drive, the constituent sent me an email, come out and look at that. Okay, you get toward Tyrone Drive, come off Old Canton, there's a huge utility cut across the street. Okay, that could be patched. Okay, leveled off, patched. Go to Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay, where we did a long sewer line cut, half the street. Can't patch that. That needs to be a candidate for resurfacing. You know, in order to get it addressed correctly. There's no ADA issues or anything, so.
Well, I was I think I was under, we're all under the impression that the utility cuts are not in that pot, is it pothole money, is that what we're calling it?
The pothole money, we approved up to $4 million. As I understand, the bids went over, so none of those contracts weren't awarded. Is that right, Mayor?
That's right.
The city council chose not to award those contracts.
It didn't, yeah, the bids came back over the amount.
That's what I thought I heard.
But utility cuts are not in the pothole money.
No,
That came out of urgent needs or something.
something else, yeah.
In Pennsylvania, that's more than just a utility cut, that's 100 feet times 5, 6 feet.
So the utility cuts that didn't get fixed, and the utility cut plan that was done, what, 9 months ago?
Yes.
8 months ago, whatever? So is there a second round of utility cuts that are being bid out?
No, we haven't allocated any funds for that.
How much was spent on that round of utility cuts?
They came out
Like
over-
$750,000.
$700,000.
Was it like $750,000?
I think that's about right.
A little less than that.
And I don't want to belabor who shot John, but I'm curious too, because, you know, there's a place at Manhattan where there was a sewer line that had to be dug up, and then you go, Martingale runs into Manhattan, and there is a pothole so deep that you only see the top of the pylon where they dug into the sewer, but they fixed Manhattan. It's the craziest things. I mean, I don't know how they prioritize them or what the deal is, but I know those people call 411 once a week or 311 once a week.
Well, it sounds like if we need to do anything, if the city,
Utility cut.
if the 3 to 5 million didn't get passed to council because it came in over bid, maybe we can at least look at including another round of utility cuts and try to get those caught up.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if we did as many as we did for 750, if we put $1 million to it,
By the time you did it this year, if you put it out for bid, you'd be past the season, wouldn't you?
Well, it depends. You know, we discussed this internally. You know, of course, we would definitely revise what we put out before and make it more attractive toward the winter months, where we would allow the contractors to maybe use a warm or even a cold mix as it relates to a hot mix asphalt. That way the availability would be more available for the contractors. Also, too, most asphalt contractors don't do work December, January, February, or even March. So, but they still want to keep some crews busy. So that would allow them to put in a bid. They'll probably be more attractable versus some of the other contractors who actually be a middleman and will be paying an extra surcharge for them, you know, in relation to their overhead. So.
Along that line, Mayor, can I ask you, when the city council said no, that came in over, is there a way that, I mean, was the bids too high because we included too much quantity? I mean, is there a way that we could go back and look at that to get it within a budget, or what was the objection? I mean,
Well, so the council didn't say no.
Okay.
Because the bids came in too high, it never got to the
Okay.
council. So I just want to make sure I
Okay.
clear that up.
I didn't-
It never-
I
It
misunderstood
never got to
that.
the council.
Okay.
So what Public Works is doing, is my understanding, is looking at how to possibly repackage that.
That's what I was
Put
asking.
it back out, yes, sir.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
but should utility cuts that are left out there be included in that? I mean, it just sounds like a lot of the problems were, I mean, there are more need than there is money to fix it, but
Yeah.
if we could get the utility cuts, I know what Lacey and Ms. Powell they were always saying, if we could just get caught up with utility cuts, that's a lot of the calls that you guys are getting that are, get you back caught up.
Can y'all make a determination on what the real needs are? Because I know that we had about 1,700 backlog. What we get about, how many did we get done under that last contract?
300?
So we know we still got at least,
It was close to 400.
so we still got at least 1,300
Utility
outstanding utility cuts.
But I think, though, there needs to be more of a correlation between the water and sewer department as it relates to where those cuts are, so we can have a better idea of the size.
Well, can y'all get that information to us so we can make a determination? So let's do this. Let's not, don't do anything yet with that bid. Let us know, bring us some data so we can determine what the real need is. The real need may be,
Twice that much.
right, it may be in utility cuts, or it may be that we use half of it for utility cuts and half of it for something else. But right now, I think at the time, we were just all, tired of hearing about potholes. And so we just allocated money. But now I think since we stuff is starting to happen and we're not getting cussed out as much, then we can make a better decision. Yeah, not as much.
much.
Would that help, from y'all's perspective, would that help?
Yes.
Utility cuts are a major.
I know it's what I see
every
around
time
here.
because
Did I read something right that these are backlog going back to 2007 or something
Yep,
like that?
you read that right.
Is that number right?
That's right.
And that's where the
Because-
1,700 bill. I
because
mean, are there
essentially
been
you
meaning to go back that far, or is it just nothing being called?
you essentially don't have the crews because you keep in mind the number of water breaks and the breaks on the sewer lines that are going on like daily. And then you have just basically one crew that's having to follow that from the pavement management standpoint. And so you're creating the backlog when they can only do maybe 1 to 2 cuts a day. So,
And so we got about 300 out of 1,700 done, and you're adding to them every day.
that's right.
Yeah.
I think we need the data, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yes, sir.
All right, let's roll, y'all.
On the stormwater management, we did do an RFP, selected Allen Engineering to help us with the city's MS4 and to prioritize some drainage channels. And we hope to have that on the council agenda for September 20th.
Alan,
Yes. On the Tiger Grant, it was executed back in March, and for State Street, along with West County line, both those to proceed were issued. We have been meeting with the Tougaloo community as it relates to the right-of-way acquisition. That is still going on, and both projects are currently in the design process.
Give them a view of West Carolina Road.
It's in- For the year 2 plan, the city is reviewing the planning methodology, mapping, data analysis, and evaluation scoring review. And providing to the commission the recommendation for year 2. Here are the list of projects and the proposed budget.
I don't really want to get to that list right now, but I did have a question when I read this the other day. On that first one, the West County Line Road, the $5.9 million, is that how much we in the end will be on the hook for if that includes some of the advances coming back?
That
It
is,
says it's 5.23 Tiger, there's 5 million other non-federal, and 260 non-federal.
there, the first one is, we've got city money from other sources, and then we've got the city 1% sales tax funds used as part of the match and other costs towards the Tiger Fund.
I mean, I was thinking we were like in for 2.25 or something on that project. I'm just trying to remember.
And I'm still catching up. So, Ms. Lee, this is the one that's related to the water, putting in the new water line.
No, that's moving the railroad and finishing the 4-lane tie-in there behind Target.
Okay, so that's another type. Is that a Tiger grant?
That-
So there's a Tiger grant for State Street and one for West County Line Road.
Okay.
It's one
One
grant,
grant,
those
two
both two
projects.
projects.
Right,
Extends County Line Road across to State Street.
okay, I got you.
Back on Pete's question though, the proposed 1% portion of that, 5.9?
I don't remember us having 5.9 million in that project.
That,
We can check that, and probably I think it would benefit us to provide all of you with a breakdown of how it relates to what the city's gonna be obligated for and actually what the Tiger grant is gonna be paying.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the agreements, it's a little bit confusing.
Because when I looked, I didn't realize it was, yeah.
We, I think, on the Tiger grant, we're looking at, we're gonna have, and this surely remember, like $2 million in it, but we're gonna also advance some money that comes back.
Had some conversation.
And it might be that some of that is being advanced and coming back, if I remember right, like we had to.
Could be.
Actually, what we approved, Mr. Perry, was the actual design, and that came before this commission, which which was for Neil Schaefer's contract to actually design State Street. And we put up, it was, how much was that? 1.4? Something like that. In which it was 80/20, so we would get reimbursed.
Yeah, you do need to have a
Yeah,
breakdown.
yeah. But we'll provide that breakdown for it as it relates to all the projects that are involved with the tire grant. Any other questions on?
McDowell Road Bridge. Oh, right there by,
Yes, sir.
okay.
Yeah.
That sufficiency rating is dropped to 7, and we've had to post that.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
It's dropped to what?
That's
The sufficiency
like,
rating has been dropped to 7
7?
out of 100,
Oof.
and we put a pretty low weight limit on it.
that almost isolates that whole section over there.
That's-
You include Robinson Road Extension.
That's how, when you say urgent need,
Yeah.
that bridge last year was not posted and had at least double digit on the sufficiency rating. After the last inspection, that rating dropped, and the county said put a pretty low weight limit on it, even though it's a 4-lane bridge, it's a timber bridge. That's where, that's where your urgent need may come into play when you have bridge surprises.
Man. All right.
But definitely we want some consideration after we get Robinson Road back open, that needs to be a top priority. And we may even want to leverage the state about doing a design build on that project.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that before we look at year 2 or 3, or whatever year we're talking about, projects and new projects, I'd like to get caught up on the rest of it first before we get into that. Like the updates on the rest of the stuff in here and where we're going, because to sit here at the last of this meeting, talk about $80 million proposal, I think is a little.
Well, we have $9 million.
Yeah.
Well, I think,
I mean, I don't object to talking about it before this meeting's over, but we put off this conversation about the Operation Orange Code and a couple of these other things until we got to them later in the presentation.
yeah, well, I think though, it's something that could have potentially caused a little confusion earlier was when we talk about the year 2 plan, if you remember, we've already approved years 1 and 2. So the only thing in my mind that we should be talking about are either not necessarily new projects, but projects that are getting underway or are already underway under years 1 or 2.
And I would like us at one point, somehow or another, working with y'all folks, to figure out another way to designate projects, because these years are getting kind of confused about what's where. You know,
I thought we were doing some kind of color coordinating or something.
we are, but, we talk about,
We did at one time.
we're kind of getting into year 3 now, or 4 of the commission, and we're year 2 projects, or 3. Just, I don't have a suggestion on how to solve that.
Gets confusing.
I agree with what you're talking about, though, is before we start talking about adding to what's there, I mean, we've still got this discussion that's on the next page or the next slide of what we already have underway and going on, so.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I think if we work through it and then we come back and do an exhaustive, I think we still do, particularly with new folks, we still do a work session.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where
Yeah, I think we'll still do a work session. We really need to get a work session underway so we can dig in, but this overview, I think keeps from, they're already gonna be overwhelmed, but it keeps from drowning them. Yeah. Sir, you just run us through and we don't need to, I guess, get stuck in the mud on this stuff.
Real quick, as you know, we did give APAC notice to proceed on the neighborhood street resurfacing. And so they are currently in Ward 6, correct? And so they're moving along. I think they just got through Woody Drive and
Woody and Old Lake.
so,
Down off Lake Shore in that area.
Yep.
so they're moving.
What has happened to the list that we had, and the same list came back, and the one that we approved, every street on there that's 300 or less, unless we found some reason not to. But we said there's a bunch of streets that aren't on here, and we were gonna look at those streets and decide what to add, and I hadn't seen that list get added to yet.
'Cause I think y'all were gonna go out and ride and double check.
Then Keisha said, well, bring us the list of the streets to look at, and I said, I don't think that's our job, but I did come back in here and have a list of about 50 streets that still hadn't gotten on any list. And my concern, quite frankly, they ain't got to Ward 7 yet, but there's one street in all of Belhaven listed on that list of streets in the city. And I'll tell you right now, Belhaven has more than one street in it. I'm not talking about the quality of any of them, but I mean, none of those streets over there are on any of the lists we're looking at.
You know, for the neighborhood streets?
And it's not on year 2 or year 3 or year 4 list.
Yeah, he's talking about neighborhoods.
I'm talking about neighborhood streets. I mean, we had a list of streets, neighborhood streets, and it had a score on it. And we sat here and said, don't care where they are, if it's 300 or less, unless
Right.
the fellow said there's a reason not to do it.
Yep.
We're gonna do all the ones that are 300 or less. And we said, but what about the streets that aren't on here? For example, St. Mary is not on there, St. Anne is not on there, Myrtle is not on there, Divine, what little bit of it still has asphalt is not on there. It's not even on the list to be scored.
We actually added those streets on the list, and we did
Well, where's that list?
ratings. I think we did send.
Yeah.
We ain't got it.
The list that generally goes out is the one that we give for the Operation Orange Cone, which we highlight in yellow, 4.3 miles or 4.5.
We did rated all the streets
Yeah, all the
that
streets.
we received from submission members.
How do we get the list out?
The streets that were less than 300 rating.
Yeah.
That's what we selected for.
If you've added to the list, how do we get a copy of that list?
We can send it, we can send
I
it.
mean, 'cause-
Yeah.
and I gave a bunch of streets down in
We all.
the Midtown area,
We all
too.
put some on.
I mean, I'm not talking about just Belhaven.
Well, it's like you said, that we had that work session meeting, well, it wasn't a work session meeting, but we had a meeting where you and I were asking questions.
Right.
And a couple of guys from INS, but that was right before Director Powell left. We were we had some discussion about a work session.
And we learned a lot about how that list was
Comes
made.
together,
Was-
yeah.
was
It made some
formulated.
sense, but I mean,
It doesn't make any sense if the street's not even on there to begin with.
right, well, that's why we added some streets to it.
They
Yeah,
did
not
But
every
my question is,
street
we
on
ought not
there.
have to add streets that we see. Well, do we have an inventory of
That's
streets?
what they're compiling, or I hope it's
It's
compiled.
compiled. There's a list of.
We need.
So we need, so that's something.
Initially, we rated.
Here, look, I think what we should do is consider what this work session needs to look like. And then we can come back and have a work session where we're not.
Here's your new text from 734265.
What we want to potentially be able to look at to vote on, whatever the case may be. Yes, sir.
And let's get the material that we're gonna look at in that work session to us ahead of time. And one thing too, by the way, and I was gonna ask this, we got that big list of all these streets in town, it's little sections, and it talks about from here to here, and a little section. If we could get that in an electronic spreadsheet thing so that you could, like it's got High Street in 4 different segments. This segment, and it's rated here. And if there's a way you could take and sort it and play with it and put all High Street together and see how this segment's rated at 90 and this one's at 30, I mean, if we could get that in electronic, and also so you could expand it where you could read it. If there's a way to get it in electronic format, it would be nice.
Okay.
Maybe even in a Google Drive where, as they're updating it real time, we can go back in and look.
Yeah, but just, the list we've got is of all the streets, the ones that's got the PCI and the traffic count and all that on it.
That's a safety.
But that thing, you can't go through there and
And that was.
it talks about so many segments.
Well, I know you know, there, on the list that we talked about with y'all that day, like in Ward 1, you and I took a couple different days and we drove as many streets as we could drive in Ward 1. It was raining one of those days. But we found streets that weren't even on, so it's a 300, if it was on 300 or below,